Okay, so for this lecture, this is going to be lecture number 2 in this series. We've already created a spawner that spawns my enemies, and it creates them there, moves them down the path, moves them rather quickly actually, because I've updated the wave information. And then they end right here. I've got a checklist of things that I want to go over with this lecture. And the first checklist that I want to do is I want to destroy enemies when they reach the end of the path. As you can see, our enemies, when they reach the end of the path, they're not getting destroyed. They still show up here on my hierarchy, and I must exit to save the screen, obviously. So I want that to not happen, but let's think about that for just a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open a new program that I've installed on my computer, and so that it can allows me to do a little bit of drawing here in front of you. So when I reach, let's see if I can actually get this to draw. There we go. So I've got a path, I've got another path, and then I've got another path. And when I move towards this path, at some point, my enemy is going to be at waypoint number, we'll say 2. This is waypoint number 1. Although at index, it's at index 0, and at this index, this is index number 1. When it reaches this point right here, we are done. Okay? So I know that when I reach this point, I'm incrementing my wave index, right? That's what I'm doing when I reach point number 2. But when I reach point number 3, if I increment my wave index, I'm actually outside of my index, because if I have my array and it contains my 3 waypoints, 1, 2, and 3, I start here, I move towards number 2. When I get there, then I increment my wave index, and then I move towards number 3. I increment my wave index, but I'm not moving towards anything anymore. It's actually empty. So I'm actually done at that point. So I need to, when I get to this point, I need to destroy my enemy, or destroy game object. And so how would I know that that's where I'm actually at? So let me see if I can get control back. I can even have my mouse have control back. Here we go. So I'm going to basically close that out. So we need to go back into my, I think it's going to be under enemy spawner if I'm not mistaken. So let's go into my enemy spawner code right here. No, it's actually not there. It's going to be under my enemy pathing. I'm sorry. It's going to be under here, my enemy pathing. I'm moving my enemy down the path. I start at waypoint index as 0. As long as my waypoint index plus 1 is not greater than count, and I do that because I do this, waypoint index plus 1. I want to get the target vector, which is my next waypoint. When I get to the end of my waypoints, this is actually null. It's undefined. I don't have another waypoint after my last one. So what I really need to do is I need to get the last index of an array. And you might not know how that's actually done, but it's actually not that hard. How do I get the last index of an array? Well, if I want to get a sequence of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to get the last sequence of that value, I'm actually looking at 5. Okay, that's the value that I'm looking at. But how do I know that that's the last one? Well, I know that's the last one because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers, and I'm accessing the 5th value, which is the count that I have, the length of my array, the count of my array. So I know that if I take my enemy.getPath prefab and I access my count, I'm accessing the very last part of that array, but not quite, because what does count return? In the case of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, count is going to return 5, because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 indices in this array. But where does the index start? The index actually starts at 0. Remember that the index for the array starts at 0. So it's not really the index. If I wanted to do a count and I wanted to access this index, so it's wave get path prefab, if I'm accessing just the count, then I'm accessing number 5, which is actually doesn't exist, because my array indices start at 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's no 5 index. But there is a 4 index. Okay, that's my last one. So what do? I access the number that I have in my indexes, and then I just subtract 1. And that's going to get me the very last index of my array. And then I can set that to vector 2, and I can just call that last waypoint vector. And I also need to make sure that I'm calling the method getPrefab returns and indices of arrays, and so then I use that to grab. So hopefully this goes away. Why is this not going away? What's going on here? Can I implicitly convert type from transformed to, oh, because this is a transform, because now what I need to do is I need to say transform.position. There we go. Because it's a vector 2, and this is not a vector 2 here. This is actually a wave config object, and inside this wave config object I'm going to have a transform.position. That's my position of my waypoint. So I grab the last waypoint in my prefab list, and that prefab list is a list of transforms, and therefore I access the position of that waypoint and return that as my last waypoint vector. And that's how you get the last waypoint of the vector, and that's what I'm basically looking for. So if I get to my target vector, I'm going to do a ++ waypoint index. Well, before I even get to that, what I really want to do is I want to check to see if I'm at my last waypoint. So vector 2 transform.position is equal to last waypoint vector. If that's the case, then destroy game object. Else, if my transform position, my current position, is equal to my target vector, then increment my waypoint index. Now, obviously, this won't ever happen if I get to the point where I'm at my last waypoint index. If I'm at my last waypoint in general, I'm not even going to do a increment here. So what's going to basically happen is that this target vector will be false, but this last waypoint vector will actually be true. Actually, this last waypoint vector and my target vector will actually be the same. I'm sorry, these will actually be the same thing. So if I'm basically looking at my last waypoint vector, then I'm going to destroy my game object. But if I'm not at my last waypoint vector, then obviously my target vector is not equal to my last waypoint vector. So then I'm just going to increment my waypoint index until I do reach that point. But if my last waypoint vector is in fact is equal to where I'm at, then I'm going to destroy the game object rather than increment the waypoint index, because then what's going to happen with the incrementing of the waypoint index is that I'm already going to actually be at this point. In fact, what I should probably even do, and this would actually even work better, because if I need to increment my waypoint index, I need to make sure that this actually is outside of my if statement. So instead of an else if, I do want my target vector to actually increment my waypoint index, because these will be the same. So I want my game object to be destroyed, and I want my waypoint index vector to increment and then go to the next enemy. So in this case, making sure that I'm perfectly okay with that, enemy pathing is inside of my enemy. My enemy is the one that's going to actually be destroyed. And just in case this continues, my waypoint index is going to be outside of this if statement, so it will stop going. So let's just see if that actually is what we get when we test. So my enemy goes to the end and disappears. Perfect. Excellent. It works, and we get no errors or anything like that. So we have a valid run of move enemy down the path, and when it reaches the last waypoint vector, it destroys. Okay, so let's go to my next problem that I have. I need to create another path and another enemy prefab and 3 more waves. Okay, so let's do that. That's pretty easy enough to do. I'm going to go to my prefab here. I'm going to select on my enemy blue 1, select Control D, and then I'm going to pick a new sprite, and I'm going to pick, let's see, this purple one. And I'm going to pick a different one so it kind of stands out just a little bit. So I'll pick that one. I don't really need to do anything else with that. I'm pretty good. It has a layer of enemy. I'm going to change that to a layer of default for the time being. That's probably what you have. I've been doing some prototyping, so I need to make sure that what I have matches yours entirely. I don't really need to change my tag for anything. Let me just make sure that my enemy blue is also set to default so that I'm good there. Let me just also make sure that my transform is fine. Excellent. Good, so now I have two enemies. I have a basic path here. Let me create one more path. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this basic path and copy it. I'm going to call this one basic zigzag path. Not zigzag, but zigzag path. Let me bring that up here. And you can see that I have this path going for me, but actually what I want to do is I want to create another path with that. So I'm going to actually go into my prefab here. This is the only place where I can delete these waypoints. It's basically telling me I need to go into my prefab, open my prefab to delete my waypoints. So that's basically what I've done. I'm going to go back to my hierarchy here, and I'm going to have my first waypoint, which is right here. I'm going to select my move tool. I'm going to move it over here, and I'm going to have, actually right about there is pretty good. I'm going to copy and paste my waypoint by doing Control D. Move it over to roughly about there. That's good. And then copy and paste again, move my waypoint over to there. Same thing, copy that waypoint, move it over to there. Copy my waypoint, move it over to there. It looks like I'm doing like every 2 rows I'm going down, and then I can do the same thing. I get to there. I definitely don't want to have it disappear in that, so I'm just gonna have it disappear over in that square right there. So it's going to zag in, and zag across until it gets to this point, and that should be good enough. It would normally have gotten to this point, but I'm going to put it there so that it doesn't look as if it's changed its direction. So that's a good zigzag path point. Let me apply that to my prefab. Excellent. I don't need the path to be in my hierarchy anymore, so I'm going to delete it. I now have 2 paths, 2 enemies, and let me start creating some scripts. I have a wave 1 script here. I'm going to do another Control D, and I'm going to do that 2 more times to create 4 more paths. For wave 2, I'm going to set enemy blue 1 to be my basic zigzag path. My time between spawns will be 2 seconds at this point. My number of enemies will be 5, and my move speed will be 3. We'll do it that way. Then for wave 3, I'm going to select the enemy blue 2, and for my path prefab, I will select the basic path. My time between spawns will be different at a 0.5. My number of enemies will be 10, and my move speed will be, we'll say 5 again. And then I will do for 4, I will select enemy blue 2, I will select the basic zigzag path there. I will set this to be time between spawns as 1, number of enemies 10, and my move speed will be up to 5 again. So good, I've got 4 waves, 2 new enemies, 2 paths, and so now what's the next step? I go into my enemy spawner, and it's time to start adding my waves to my enemy spawner. So I just drag that next wave, wave 3 gets dragged, and wave 4 gets dragged. So now I have 4 waves, and if I were to play this, I should get all of my waves, but oh, they're all happening at the same time. Well, that is something that I just don't want. I want wave 1 to happen, then I want wave 2 to happen, then I want wave 3 to happen, and then I want wave 4 to happen. We can do this as long as we realize one thing. What's going on in spawn all enemies in wave? I am incrementing through the number of enemies that I told my wave, that the number of enemies my wave is going to have. Let's say, for example, 5. I create a variable to store my enemy prefab, create another one to store the initial position I want the prefab to begin, first waypoint. I instantiate my enemy with those 2 variables in a normal rotation, set that to a new enemy, and then set that wave, new enemy's wave, to the current wave that I'm in right now. And then I will yield execution until the time between spawns has executed, and then I will do it again. This right here is key. I want to yield execution only when we have spawned the enemy and we have gone through the time allotted so that I can continue this yet again. That's going to be the key here for spawning all enemies in waves. What I actually want to do is I want to do this wave, have this happen, but only when this is done will I want to start the next wave. And to do this, we can actually set my start menu or my start method to a I enumerator, because that's how we need to get a coroutine to happen. Well, I can actually create my start method as its own coroutine, and then inside of my while loop, I can right here say yield return. And what this will do is then it will get my current wave, spawn all enemies in my wave, but it will not yield execution back to the while loop until all of my enemies have been spawned. Then it will increment my wave index and now do it again. So let me play that yet again, and then we will see that, yep, there is my first wave. All 5 enemies will go through. When it reaches the final one, when it actually creates the last one, it is done creating a wave. It doesn't matter if it reaches the final point or not. What matters is that it has spawned that last enemy. And then this gets, and then our new wave gets spawned. That's wave number 3, and then wave number 4 gets spawned. And then you're going to notice that I'm at the end of my game. Well, that's kind of a short game now, isn't it? Well, we could have this game go on for a long time, actually. We could actually create a do-while loop. And let me explain what a do-while loop. I'm on 17 minutes right now, but I'm thinking that this is not a bad thing to also put into this video for the time being, is a do-while loop. Let me clear this out. Let me explain what a do-while loop is. Now, we have a while loop in general, and a while loop is keyword while, and then it has a condition. And that condition is, we'll just say, actually I'll put in like a 5 or something like that condition. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to create a better environment here, so I'll be right back. All right, I got a much better environment to work with here. It kind of looks like Khan Academy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, right there, I have a while loop. Oops, F2, while loop, there we go. So I have my while loop. And in my while loop, I have a condition. It's very hard. I just got this, so it's hard for me to write on it. And then inside of my while loop, I'm going to have statements. And these statements get run. So my while condition, if my condition is true, then execute all of my statements. Then check to see if the condition is true still. If that's the case, then run my statements again, and so on until my condition is false, and then it will break. A do while loop is slightly different. I'm going to have the keyword do, then I have my statements, then I have a curly Q, and then a while condition. And then there's a semicolon right here, by the way. What happens then is my statements are going to get run regardless if this condition is true or false, because it says do the statements, then check while my condition is true or false. If it is true, then run the statements again. If it is false, then break and then stop. So this while loop will run it either 0 to many times. This do while loop will run it at least 1 to many times. So if you want to run these statements at least once, then a do while loop is actually the way to go. And that's why we're going to do this in a do-while loop. So what am I going to do in a do-while loop? Well, I want to do and then spawn all waves while I have a looping variable set to true. Now, again, we want to yield execution while we're spawning all waves so that all my waves can be spawned before I do my do-while loop again, or else I'm going to be spawning all my waves concurrently. And there's going to be a lot of enemies in there. In fact, it'll probably be an infinitesimal amount of enemies that are all spawned at the same time. We don't want to do that. We want to yield execution, so yield return all execution before I even begin to loop it, which means that we are going to need a start coroutine, and I'm going to need to spawn all my waves. Now, what represents spawning all my waves? Well, this code actually represents the spawning of all my waves, so I'm actually going to cut that out, put it as enumerator spawn all waves, and paste that as my code for spawning all waves. And then for my looping, I'm going to obviously need a serialized field for that. It's going to be bool looping. I will initialize that to true. And so now what do we have? We have a do-while loop that's going to spawn all my waves automatically. It's not going to loop again until all of my waves have been spawned. Then all of my waves get spawned, and it's going to yield execution to spawn the next wave until all of my enemies have been spawned, and then all of my enemies are going to get spawned, and then so on and so on. So we start here, go to here, then go to here, spawn all my enemies, go back here, go back into here, spawn all my enemies, and so on until all my waves are done, go back into here and increment the loop and do my do-while loop again, and then come back and then all over again. And so now, hopefully, when I play my game, I will spawn the first set of enemies. And then after that enemies set gets spawned, we're going to spawn the next set of enemies. My looping is set to true. Look at over here. I have a check mark on my looping set to true. My enemies are not destroying me as they hit through me, so we're going to have to fix that later on. There's my third wave, and then here comes my fourth wave. I do believe that there are 10 of these, so we're going to have to wait. That's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and now my next wave should start, and there it is. And it's going to just keep looping and looping and looping and looping all the way through it, non-stop. It will not stop because I don't have looping set to false until I do unclick that. And then when I get to the final loop, we can wait for that as well. So there's wave number 3. And here comes my last wave, wave number 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and no wave, no new wave starting because my looping was set to false. So there it is. And so I think we've gone through my entire task list here. My destroy enemies when they reach the end of their path. I created I got two paths, 2 enemies, 3 more waves, and I'm setting up my enemy spawners that loops through all the enemies and the waves, and that there is a time between all of that. So we have that set up. Now in the future, what we're going to do is we are going to set it up so that we have a series of waves, and then at the end of those waves, we're going to have a boss, and we're probably not going to need the looping anymore in any way, shape, or form. So we'll just have a series of waves and then a boss level, a boss wave, and then we can go into level 2. So until then, this is the video for just spawning waves and for looping through those waves. And so hopefully this video is helpful to you. Pause it. You can pause this video anytime you want. I didn't give you any challenges here because I think a lot of this is very new, so I don't think there's much of a challenge here. It's just too hard for me to do that, but we'll be definitely doing these challenges later on. No quiz. I mentioned a quiz before. No quiz because this is a elective class, and they want you to concentrate on the heavier, more important things, which is fine. I'm absolutely fine with this. This is definitely not an important class. This is definitely a fun class. I want this to be a fun class, something that you can do when you're bored. But yeah, definitely concentrate on the other more important classes that you have to take. So no quizzes. There's nothing to be expected for you to do. I don't even expect you to do these assignments. But if you guys all do end up doing these assignments, then we can certainly get to the platformer game later on. So I do, hope that you can get to these. I'm going to make sure that these videos are very small, no longer than 30 minutes. I'm already at the 25-minute mark, so I want to stop right here. And if you have any questions, please send them to the discussion board on the MyBC. And if you have direct questions that you want to ask me, then go ahead and ask me those questions. Until then, until the next video.